In the late 22nd century, Earth established its first diplomatic contact with an interstellar alliance known as the Ascendancy. The news spread across the planet with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Humanity had long dreamed of this moment, and now it was here. Aliens, real and diverse, had extended a hand of friendship. Dr. Aiko Tran watched the broadcast from her laboratory at the Global Atmospheric Research Institute. As a leading atmospheric biologist specializing in high-altitude physiological adaptation, she found herself both professionally curious and personally wary about what this new relationship would mean for Earth. Her research had focused on how human bodies adapted to oxygen-poor environments, like those found at extreme elevations in the Himalayas or the Andes. "What do you think, Alan?" she asked, turning to her colleague who was analyzing data from their latest atmospheric sampling expedition. Major Alan Reyes, former Special Forces operator who had spent years stationed in the high Andes before joining the scientific community, shrugged. "I think we should be careful. No advanced civilization crosses light years of space just to make friends." Aiko nodded thoughtfully. Alan had always been cautious, his military background giving him a perspective that most of her academic colleagues lacked. His experience with high-altitude operations had made him an invaluable partner in her research on oxygen adaptation. "Perhaps," she replied, "but think of what we could learn from them." 6 months after first contact, reports began trickling in from around the world. People in coastal cities were experiencing unusual shortness of breath. Emergency room visits for unexplained respiratory distress increased by 15%. The elderly and those with pre-existing conditions suffered most severely. Government agencies blamed climate change and pollution, pointing to data showing slight decreases in atmospheric oxygen levels. They assured the public it was a natural, if concerning, phenomenon and implemented oxygen supplementation programs in the hardest-hit areas. Aiko wasn't convinced. The patterns didn't match any climate models she'd ever studied. "These readings don't make sense," she said one evening, examining the latest atmospheric data. "The oxygen depletion is too uniform, too consistent across different regions. That's not how environmental degradation works." She began collecting her own samples, setting up monitoring stations at various altitudes. What she discovered disturbed her deeply. The oxygen reduction was more pronounced in the lower atmosphere, with levels remaining relatively stable at higher elevations. This was the opposite of what natural processes would produce. Meanwhile, an unexpected trend emerged among certain demographics. Athletes, soldiers, and individuals living in mountainous regions reported feeling stronger, more energetic. Professional sports organizations noticed improved performance metrics, attributing it to what they jokingly called natural altitude training. Major Reyes was among the first to adapt completely to the new conditions. "I feel better than I did during my Andes deployment," he told Aiko during one of their regular physical assessments. "My resting heart rate is lower, my stamina is increasing, and I'm sleeping better." Medical examinations revealed fascinating physiological changes: increased red blood cell production, enhanced oxygen carrying capacity, and subtle changes to lung microstructure. These adaptations mirrored those seen in high-altitude populations like Sherpas or Andean natives, but were occurring at an accelerated rate. While governments celebrated this unexpected evolutionary leap, Aiko grew increasingly suspicious. The timing, so soon after first contact with the Ascendancy, couldn't be coincidental. Using high-altitude drones and satellite imagery, she identified unusual objects in the stratosphere, devices that hadn't been there before the aliens arrived. They were nearly invisible to conventional detection methods, but when analyzed through specialized filters, they emerged as distinct structures, positioned strategically around the planet. "Their atmosphere processes," she told Alan one night, voice hushed even though they were alone in her lab. "They're systematically extracting oxygen from our atmosphere." Alan's expression hardened. "So it's an invasion, not with weapons, but with suffocation. A silent genocide," Aiko agreed. Slow enough that we adapt rather than panic. But eventually, they'll take too much for even adaptation to save us. They took their findings to government officials, but were met with skepticism and warnings about creating panic. The ascendancy representatives dismissed the accusations as misinterpretations of benign atmospheric research equipment. Chancellor Verkel, the imposing 7-foot-tall primary representative of the ascendancy, personally assured world leaders that the detected objects were merely environmental monitoring devices designed to help Earth manage its climate crisis. "Why would we harm you?" he asked during a televised address, his translucent skin shimming under the studio lights. "We have traveled across the stars to find new allies, not to destroy potential friends." His words were reassuring, his manner calm and authoritative. Most believed him. Aiko and Alan did not. They formed a small team of trusted scientists and military personnel who had also adapted well to the decreasing oxygen levels. Together, they continued monitoring the situation, gathering evidence, and preparing for what they feared was coming. 6 months later, their fears were confirmed. Oxygen levels began dropping more rapidly. Cities at sea level reported mass casualties. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Governments distributed oxygen masks and constructed emergency hyperbaric facilities. Chancellor Verkel expressed concern and offered ascendancy technology to help affected areas. What few noticed was that the technology, while providing temporary relief, actually accelerated the extraction process. In a secure facility deep within the Rocky Mountains, Aiko's team had established a command center. They had managed to capture one of the smaller atmospheric processors and were reverse engineering it, learning its functions and weaknesses. "It's ingenious," Aiko admitted, studying the alien device. "It selectively binds to oxygen molecules and converts them to a supercompressed state for transport. Essentially, they're mining our air." "For what purpose?" asked Eliza Chen, a quantum physicist who had joined their group. "Oxygen is rare in the universe in its free form," Aiko explained. "Most is bound in compounds. Earth's oxygen-rich atmosphere is the result of billions of years of biological processes. To spacefaring species, we're sitting on a gold mine." Alan, who had been monitoring communications from ascendancy ships in orbit, entered the room with new information. "They're preparing for what they call Phase 2. From what I can gather, they're going to accelerate the extraction to levels that would kill even adapted humans within weeks." "When?" Aiko asked. 3 days. The team worked frantically. Developing countermeasures, they had discovered that the extraction devices were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies and had designed disruptors that could neutralize them. The challenge was reaching the devices, positioned in the stratosphere over 20 kilometers above Earth's surface. Conventional aircraft couldn't reach them, and the team didn't have access to spacecraft. "We need to use their own technology against them," Aiko proposed. "The oxygen they're extracting is being transported to collection points via some kind of energy corridor. If we can introduce our disruptors into that stream, they should reach the processors." The plan was risky. They would need to capture a transport node, a smaller component of the extraction network that operated closer to the ground. Based on their analysis, disrupting even a few key processes would cause a cascade failure throughout the system. As they prepared, Aiko received an unexpected visitor, a member of the Ascendancy, different from the others she had seen. Smaller, with fewer appendages and a distinctly different coloration. "My name is Nareth," the alien said through a translation device. "I am seeking asylum." Initially suspicious, the team interrogated Nareth thoroughly. They learned that not all members of the Ascendancy supported the oxygen extraction plan. Nareth belonged to a minority faction that believed in genuine cooperation with other species rather than exploitation. Chancellor Verkel represents the Dominion faction, Nareth explained. "They believe all resources should be controlled by the Ascendancy. They've done this before, to 12 other worlds with oxygen-producing biospheres." "What happened to those worlds?" Alan asked, though he suspected the answer. They died. The inhabitants suffocated or fought among themselves for the remaining oxygen. The Dominion waits until the planet is clear, then introduces their own engineered organisms to maintain oxygen production at levels suitable for harvesting. Nareth provided crucial information about the extraction system and confirmed what Aiko had already suspected. The Ascendancy had been shocked by humanity's adaptation response. Your species' ability to increase oxygen efficiency has never been observed before, Nareth said. It has caused considerable concern among the Dominion leadership. That's why they're accelerating to Phase 2. They fear you might develop countermeasures if given more time. With Nareth's help, the team refined their plan. They identified a transport node located in the remote Atacama Desert and prepared for a stealth operation to capture it. Alan led the mission, taking a small team of adapted Special Forces operators. The raid was successful, but not without cost. 2 team members were killed by the node's automated defense systems, and Alan himself was severely injured. Still, they secured the node and transported it back to their facility. Using Nareth's knowledge and their own analysis, they modified it to carry their disruptors into the extraction network. As Phase 2 began, oxygen levels plummeted around the world. Panic spread, and governments struggled to maintain order. The Ascendancy offered protection zones where oxygen levels would be maintained at the cost of complete submission to Ascendancy authority. Many accepted this devil's bargain, too desperate to question the terms. Others, especially those who had adapted better, resisted and sought higher ground where oxygen depletion was less severe. Aiko's team activated their modified transport node, sending disruptors into the extraction system. For several tense hours, they waited for any sign that their plan had worked. Then, reports began coming in from around the world. Extraction devices were falling from the sky, disabled and harmless. Oxygen levels stabilized and gradually began to rise. The Ascendancy response was immediate and violent. Ships descended from orbit, targeting key infrastructure and military installations. They had abandoned the pretense of friendship and launched a conventional invasion. What they hadn't counted on was humanity's enhanced physiological state. The months of adaptation had created a population with extraordinary stamina, endurance, and resilience. Special Forces units, already the most adapted, led the resistance, able to operate effectively even in the oxygen-poor conditions that the Ascendancy had intended to use as a weapon. Aiko, meanwhile, had prepared her most important countermeasure. Using the communication technologies provided by Nareth, she broadcast evidence of the Ascendancy's actions, not just to Earth, but to the wider galactic community. The broadcast included detailed documentation of the extraction plan, testimony from Nareth, and evidence of similar attacks on other worlds. Most critically, it revealed that the Dominion faction had been acting without the full knowledge or consent of all Ascendancy member species. The response came faster than anyone had expected. Within days, ships from other galactic civilizations arrived in Earth's orbit. They intercepted and disabled Ascendancy vessels, forcing a retreat. Representatives from these civilizations, the collective of free worlds, made contact with Earth governments. They expressed shock at the Dominion's actions and offered assistance in recovering from the attack. Chancellor Verkol and other Dominion leaders were apprehended by their own people, facing justice under Ascendancy law. The extraction technology was dismantled, and reparations were promised. In the aftermath, Earth found itself in a transformed position. No longer naive newcomers to galactic society, humans were now recognized for their extraordinary resilience and adaptive capacity. Aiko's research into the physiological changes became the foundation for a new field of study: evolutionary response under extreme pressure. The adapted humans retained their enhanced characteristics, passing them to subsequent generations. Earth had unwittingly undergone a forced evolutionary leap, 6 months after the failed invasion. Aiko stood on the observation deck of a collective diplomatic vessel, looking down at Earth. Beside her stood Nareth, now serving as liaison between Earth and the wider galactic community. Your world looks different now, Nareth observed. The atmosphere has a distinct signature that our sensors can detect. Higher oxygen efficiency in the biosphere, Aiko explained. Plants and algae adapted too, producing more oxygen with less energy expenditure. Another unexpected outcome. The Dominion chose your world because they thought you were weak, Nareth said. They never understood that pressure doesn't always crush. Sometimes it transforms. Alan joined them, walking with a slight limp from his injuries, but otherwise fully recovered. The latest reports show the last of the extraction damage has been reversed. Oxygen levels are now 5% higher than pre-contact baselines. And the adaptation changes? Nareth asked. Permanent, as far as we can tell, Aiko said. Enhanced oxygen transport efficiency, increased red blood cell function, improved mitochondrial performance. Even brain function seems to have benefited. We're still documenting all the effects. You realize what this means, Alan said quietly. We're no longer exactly the same species we were before. Aiko nodded thoughtfully. Homo sapiens adaptus, some are calling it, though genetically we're still human. Functionally, we've undergone a significant shift. Your children will be even more adapted, Nareth added. Natural selection will favor those with the strongest adaptations. The implications were enormous. Humanity had not merely survived an extinction attempt, they had emerged transformed, enhanced, and with a new place in the galactic community. As the ship prepared to return to Earth, Aiko reflected on the strange journey that had brought them here. What had begun as an attempt to exterminate humanity had instead launched them into a new evolutionary chapter. The Dominion's oxygen theft had inadvertently given humanity its greatest gift, a future among the stars, with the biological resilience to thrive there. They thought they were burying us, she murmured, recalling an old proverb. They didn't realize we were seeds. 2 years after the invasion attempt, Earth had established its first colonies on Mars and the Moon. The adapted physiology of humans made them exceptionally well-suited for the low-oxygen environments of these worlds, requiring minimal life support compared to pre-adaptation needs. Aiko had established a research institute dedicated to studying and supporting human adaptation across various environments. The Institute for Advanced Evolutionary Studies became a hub for scientists from Earth and other worlds interested in humanity's remarkable adaptive response. Alan, fully recovered, led the security division of Earth's new diplomatic defense force, an organization created to protect human interests in galactic affairs while preventing future exploitation attempts. Together with allies from the collective, they had begun mapping the 12 worlds previously devastated by the Dominion faction. Plans were underway to restore these planets' biospheres using lessons learned from Earth's recovery. The galactic community watched this human expansion with a mixture of admiration and wariness. The species that had been marked for quiet extinction had instead emerged as a resilient, rapidly advancing civilization with unique biological advantages. As Dr. Aiko Tran wrote in her landmark paper, Pressure-Induced Evolutionary Acceleration in Human Physiology, the attempt to suffocate humanity became the breath that awakened our dormant potential. In trying to extinguish us, they only tempered our resolve and transformed our capabilities. Perhaps the greatest lesson from this chapter in human history is that our greatest strength lies not in technology or weapons, but in our fundamental ability to adapt, to transform pressure into progress, and to breathe deep even when the air grows thin. The galaxy would never again underestimate the species that turned an oxygen heist into an evolutionary gift. In the decades that followed, humanity's story became a cautionary tale told throughout the galaxy. Never underestimate a species fighting for its breath, for in that desperate gasping, new strength may be born. And on Earth, children learned a new version of an ancient phrase: what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Only now, it wasn't just a saying, it was their evolutionary history. The atmospheric processes that once threatened Earth's existence now stood in museums as relics of a pivotal moment in human history. The moment when aliens cut Earth's oxygen supply, and humans thought it was altitude training and adapted. Chancellor Verkel, imprisoned on a collective penal colony, was reported to have said to his guards, "We didn't fail because our technology was flawed. We failed because we didn't understand that humans don't just survive, they thrive under pressure." On the 5th anniversary of what came to be known as the Oxygen War, representatives from across the galaxy gathered at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The air inside the building had been adjusted to match Earth's pre-invasion composition, a courtesy to non-adapted visitors. For most humans, it felt uncomfortably oxygen-rich, a reminder of how far they had come. Dr. Aiko Tran addressed the assembly, her voice steady and clear without any breathing assistance despite the thinner air that had become Earth's new normal. 5 years ago, we faced extinction through a method so subtle many didn't recognize it until it was almost too late. Today, we extend a hand of friendship to all peaceful civilizations, not as naive newcomers, but as equals who have earned their place among the stars. She paused, looking around at the diverse assemblage of beings. We have learned that true strength isn't measured by technological advancement or military might, but by the capacity to adapt, to transform challenge into opportunity. The Dominion faction sought to steal our breath. Instead, they taught us to breathe more efficiently than we ever thought possible. Nareth, now serving as the Ascendancy's reformed representative to Earth, stepped forward to stand beside her. "And we have learned," the alien said, "that exploitation is ultimately self-defeating. The Dominion's actions have led to a stronger human race and a more vigilant galactic community. The resources they sought to steal could have been shared through cooperation, benefiting all without harm to any. Together, they unveiled a monument, a crystalline sculpture that captured the molecular structure of oxygen, surrounded by representations of human DNA showing the adaptations that had saved the species. As the ceremony concluded, Aiko found a quiet moment with Alan, who had become more than a colleague over the years of working together. "Do you ever wonder," he asked, "what would have happened if we hadn't adapted? If we'd responded like the other worlds they targeted?" Aiko considered the question carefully. "I think adaptation was always our greatest strength. Throughout our history, humans have faced environmental challenges and changed to meet them. The Dominion just didn't study their history thoroughly enough to know what they were dealing with. They thought they were being clever," Alan said with a slight smile, "stealing our oxygen so gradually we wouldn't notice until it was too late. Instead, they triggered the most rapid directed evolution event in human history." Aiko finished. "Sometimes I think we should thank them." "I wouldn't go that far," Alan replied with a laugh. "But I will say this, I can run a marathon now without breaking a sweat, at altitudes that would have killed me before. Silver linings." That evening, as celebrations continued around the world, Aiko stood on the roof of the Institute, looking up at the stars. So many of them now represented not just distant suns, but places where humanity had allies, trading partners, and perhaps someday, colonies. The air felt crisp and thin in her lungs, but it was enough, more than enough. Her body processed every molecule with an efficiency that would have seemed miraculous just a few years earlier. A shooting star streaked across the sky, not a natural meteor, but a ship entering the atmosphere. More visitors arriving for the anniversary observances. Earth was becoming a crossroads, a meeting place for diverse civilizations. The Oxygen War had nearly been humanity's end. Instead, it had become their beginning, their first step into a larger universe, not as victims or even survivors, but as a species transformed by adversity into something new and remarkable. Aiko took a deep breath of the thin air and smiled. The aliens had tried to steal Earth's breath. Instead, they had taught humanity to breathe in ways they never imagined possible. And that made all the difference. Across the world, in high-altitude training facilities that had once been emergency shelters. A new generation of humans was coming of age, children born after the adaptation, who had never known the oxygen-rich world of their ancestors. They grew up stronger, with greater endurance and resilience than any generation before them. In space, human colonies thrived in environments that would have been impossible to inhabit without extensive life support before the adaptation. The reduced oxygen requirements meant smaller, more efficient habitats and the ability to establish footholds on worlds previously considered marginal for human settlement. Earth itself had changed. The altered human physiology had led to new approaches in agriculture, architecture, and urban planning. Cities expanded upward rather than outward, with the most desirable living spaces now at higher altitudes where the air was thinner but more invigorating to adapted lungs. The relationship between humans and the rest of the galaxy continued to evolve. Some species remained wary of these adaptable newcomers, seeing in them the potential to colonize environments that had previously been the exclusive domain of specialized life forms. Others sought alliances, recognizing the value of having such resilient partners. For Dr. Aiko Tran, the work continued. Each new generation showed subtle refinements in the adaptation process, and her team documented these changes meticulously, building a comprehensive understanding of human evolutionary potential. "We've only seen the beginning," she often told her students. "The pressure applied by the oxygen theft triggered changes our bodies were already capable of making, given the right circumstances. What other dormant abilities might we possess? What other adaptations might be possible under different types of pressure?" These questions drove her research forward, even as she took on additional responsibilities as Earth's scientific liaison to the collective of free worlds. Major Alan Reyes, now General Reyes, oversaw the integration of Earth's defense forces with allied security networks. His first-hand experience with adaptation and his military background made him uniquely qualified to understand both the strategic implications of human physiological changes and the potential threats from species who might see those changes as concerning. Together, they represented humanity's new approach to galactic relations, cautiously optimistic, scientifically curious, but never again naive about the potential dangers lurking among the stars. Nareth remained a crucial ally, helping translate not just language but cultural concepts between humans and other species. The former asylum seeker had become one of the most respected diplomats in the reformed ascendancy, advocating for ethical interactions with developing worlds. On the 10th anniversary of First Contact, a date now commemorated with more solemnity than celebration, Aiko, Alan, and Nareth gathered at the original research facility in the Rocky Mountains, where they had once worked desperately to save humanity from extinction. "It looks smaller than I remember," Alan commented as they toured the now historical site. "Everything does. From a different perspective," Nareth replied. "When I first came here seeking asylum, this place seemed like the last outpost of a doomed species. Now it's a shrine to resilience." Aiko ran her hand along a workbench where she had once disassembled an atmospheric processor, trying to understand how it functioned before time ran out. "We were so frightened, so desperate. I'm not sure I ever really believed we would succeed." "But you did," Nareth said. "And in doing so, you changed not just your species, but the trajectory of galactic politics. The Dominion faction is disbanded. Resource extraction policies throughout the collective have been reformed, all because humans refuse to simply lie down and suffocate." Alan smiled slightly. "We thought it was altitude training." The phrase had become something of a galactic joke, a shorthand for misinterpreting an extinction attempt as an opportunity. But like many jokes, it contained a profound truth. Perception shaped reality. By misunderstanding what was happening to them, humans had responded in ways that ultimately saved them. The most remarkable adaptation wasn't physiological, Aiko said thoughtfully. It was psychological. We faced a slow apocalypse and interpreted it as a challenge to overcome rather than a doom to accept. As they left the facility, now preserved as a museum, they paused at a memorial to those who had died during the early days of oxygen depletion, before adaptation had taken hold. Millions of names etched in stone. A reminder that survival had come at a terrible cost. "We mustn't forget," Aiko said softly. "Adaptation isn't painless. Evolution demands sacrifice. But it offers continuation," Nareth added, "and sometimes transformation." The sun was setting over the mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. In the distance, they could see one of the new vertical cities rising from the foothills, its upper levels reaching into the thinner air that now felt like home to adapted humans. The story of the oxygen theft and humanity's remarkable response had become legend, taught in schools across Earth and studied by xenobiologists throughout the galaxy. But for those who had lived through it, who had fought and struggled and ultimately prevailed, it remained something more intimate and profound, a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat can become the greatest gift. As darkness fell, the stars emerged above them, countless worlds, countless possibilities, and somewhere out there, perhaps, another young species facing its own existential challenge, its own opportunity for transformation. Aiko hoped they would rise to it as humanity had, and perhaps someday, their representatives would stand with humans among the collective, telling their own story of adaptation and survival. For now, though, she was content to breathe the thin mountain air, each efficient inhalation a testament to what humans had become, not victims of an alien plot, but beneficiaries of an unintended gift, the capacity to thrive where others had sought their destruction. In trying to steal Earth's breath, the ascendancy had given humanity its second wind, and with it, a future among the stars that none could have imagined before the day when aliens cut Earth's oxygen supply, and humans thought it was altitude training and adapted